Alright, a quick heads up on what I've been working on. I played Resident Evil 2, and not only is it really good, it's an amazing look at how much games have changed, and how hard it is to have games like this in an age where walkthroughs are published before they even release. I'll be doing a quick video on the indie game Gris, and how there's a place for games that are more about their beauty than their gameplay, and I just played the game Oxenfree, which I absolutely loved. Finally, I finished my third playthrough of Dark Souls 2, and I think I've now given it a fair chance, and I'll be looking at why it still makes me angry every time I play it. But today, we're going to take a look at the Anthem quote-unquote demos. I played the closed beta, the VIP beta, and finally hours of the open beta, and I've got some thoughts after the logo. I'm not going to get too deeply into critiquing this game yet because I plan on playing it through upon release, but I can comment on the marketing, on quality of life issues, and the performance that were on offer the last few weeks. And so you have a decent understanding of what you'll see. I need to let you know what I played the game on. I played Anthem on the Xbox One X and on the PC, and as you look at the footage, I want you to know what kind of PC it's actually running on. I've got a GTX 1080 and an i5 8600K processor with 32GB of RAM. It's not a super top-end PC, but it's a pretty damn good machine, and I've yet to install a game that doesn't default to ultra settings. In its current build, on my pretty damn nice gaming PC, I could not get a consistent 60 FPS at 1080p. Enabling VSync, which I almost never have to do, I was able to hover around 60 FPS, but with inexcusably frequent frame drops, stutters, rubber banding, and in Fort Tarsis the performance was just simply abysmal. The game is poorly optimized for PC in almost every single way. As far as settings go, they are subpar, including no field of view slider, and a motion blur toggle that does almost nothing. In fact, this game has the most obnoxious and nauseating motion blur I have seen in a very long time. It was so bad I literally could not play anymore, and eventually found a way to reduce it by turning off ambient occlusion because the motion blur toggle doesn't toggle the motion blur for some reason. And the really weird thing is, I saw zero improvement in performance by dropping settings down. Even going down to medium gave me no appreciable difference in performance out in the world. I didn't try low because I just totally refuse. What is the point of having a decent PC if I have to ever play a game on low? I'll just buy it on the Xbox One X in that case. Even leaving aside the disastrous infinite loading screen problems and consistent matchmaking failures, this is shaping up to be a pretty bad PC port. Menus are really annoying. They require key presses all over the place and like 2 or 3 clicks anywhere where 1 click would do. Almost everything about every single menu is poorly designed and obnoxious, and is clearly made with a controller in mind, and even there, they are still bad menus and a terrible UI in general. Mouse and keyboard controls are bad, with key bindings being annoying, flying feeling just awful with a mouse and a keyboard. I ended up switching to a controller and enjoyed the game much more once I did. So, from what I've seen so far, Bioware has a ton of work to do to even get this port to acceptable, much less good. And I will just say it again, the interface and menus in Anthem are just really inefficient. It takes 5 inputs to launch a mission. The loadout screen is clunky and slow. Everything about this game, aside from flying and space magic, screams unfinished and unpolished, and there are just so many really poor quality of life issues all over the place. And when I say the game feels unfinished, I'm not talking about the content, which I can't make a judgment on yet. I'm talking about all of the other systems that make a game either easy or onerous to engage with. One really quick example. When you pick up a piece of loot in the world, it does not credit to your inventory until you finish a mission. So, if you are disconnected, or you have to leave, or the game crashes, you lose all of your XP and loot. Why would anyone possibly think this was an acceptable design choice? Locked loadouts are bad enough, and yes, you can only change your gear at a kiosk in the hub area, but some missions can take 30 to 50 minutes, and having played a bunch of online games, I am 100% positive that disconnects and server issues will abound early on, meaning you can have an hour totally wasted if the server boots you, which happened 33% of my time during the recent demos. Literally, 33%. 1 of every 3 missions, I wasted my time completely because the server booted me. Now, Anthem is a tremendously important title for Bioware and EA. It needs to be successful, and the most important part of a successful game is the gameplay. So, how does the game feel? Anthem's gameplay is pretty good. I am one of the few people who enjoyed Mass Effect Andromeda. Its story was admittedly awful, but I enjoyed the combat so much that I was able to finish the game and had a good time playing it. I generally do not like third-person shooters at all. I haven't liked any of the Gears of War. I didn't love The Division. I don't like the combat in GTA or really any third-person shooter outside of Vanquish, Dead Space, and Mass Effect Andromeda. A game has to really shine to win me over as a third-person shooter. It has to have something different than all the others. And BioWare's last third-person shooter delivered in a way I was simply not expecting it to. Mass Effect Andromeda had a really fluid and aggressive combat system that felt fresh and unique. Anthem is basically Mass Effect Andromeda's combat system plus flying. It's got the same gunplay, the powers are very similar to Mass Effect Andromeda's biotics, it even has the same boost, jump, and dodge that made Mass Effect Andromeda so fun to play. And the flying is really fucking cool. So the basic systems are all in place to produce a combat experience I should absolutely love. But I don't love it, I only like it. And that's because there are several things about the combat that do not work at all. All of the javelins have a heavy focus on mobility, and the maps are all quite vertical, which in theory should lead to fast-paced and chaotic encounters. But sadly, they often just don't. Instead, it plays very much like a cover-based combat system on any setting above easy. Enemies are hyper-accurate, so even dodging or literally blasting off and flying will not stop you from getting damaged with hit-scan weapons. And Anthem has made the strange decision to have non-regenerating health and shields that recharge absurdly slowly. If your shield breaks, the only thing you can do is hide behind a rock and wait for like 10 seconds until your shield recharges. And enemies can break your shields in moments. What this means is that you spend an annoying amount of time not playing the game. You spend a bunch of time standing behind a rock, and because there's no actual cover system, it both looks goofy and leaves you unable to do anything. When you take cover in a game with a cover system, you're still actually interacting with the game. You can see your enemies and form a plan, you can blind fire, and you can look at the cool animations. In Anthem, you have to actually break line of sight with the enemy to take cover, which means that all of your time spent recharging your shields is spent looking at a rock. I understand the desire to not have a cover system, as the game seems to be built on mobility. But in order to actually take advantage of the game's greatest strength, you need to allow players to mitigate damage without hiding behind rocks. BioWare should have had movement, or at the very least flying, be the primary means of evading damage. Or they could have had a healing class. As it stands, the game is a strange mix of systems that don't feel terribly cohesive. It's a cover shooter without a cover system. It's a horde shooter that requires you to not stay in the line of sight of hordes of enemies. Likewise, enemies can have just insanely unfun levels of health when on normal difficulty. BioWare would be well served by calling the easy setting normal and going up from there, because the game is extremely fun when played on easy and just dreadfully annoying on normal before becoming toxic on hard. I understand that the gear system is meant to mitigate this, but a normal mission means that's the preferred way to play the game, and what is called normal here is not fun, or at least not as fun as easy. I have said over and over and over that the very worst way to implement difficulty in a shooter is lazily increasing enemy health. On normal, enemies have too much health, although it is tolerable. On hard, enemies have more than double health and do double damage. I make it a habit to play most games on hard because I enjoy a challenge. But in example 1000 of this very thing, difficulty is only fun when it reinforces the core design choices of your combat system. Anthem is at its most enjoyable when you are flying around and fighting large groups of enemies. But the second you turn the difficulty up to normal or above, you're left carefully plinking away at them and hiding behind rocks. It actively breaks everything that makes the combat system unique. I've rarely had a game that is so clearly more fun when played on easy than Anthem. Enemy AI, unit type, spawn density, none of these things change in any way whatsoever based upon difficulty. The only change is enemies turn into annoying bullet sponges and do double damage to you, meaning the combat becomes stationary, stale, and boring. Destiny also raises enemy health and damage at higher difficulties, but it also significantly changes enemy AI. Destiny's AI in Raids or Gambit are like playing a different game than the campaign. In the easier activities, Destiny's enemies almost never use their special abilities. They don't dodge, they don't take cover, and they have terrible aim. In Gambit, enemies constantly use their abilities. They flank and dive for cover, they coordinate fire, and are very accurate. It's a much more interesting way to up difficulty because it feels different to play on a moment-to-moment basis. Destiny also changes unit types and spawns based upon difficulty setting. And even on the harder difficulties, Destiny's enemies don't solely rely on hit-scan weapons, so using the mobility systems are more effective at mitigating damage than is possible in Anthem. And that's not the only thing that makes what could have been an amazing combat system only kinda good in practice. While the particle effects are fantastic, and the world of Anthem is quite nice looking, though nowhere near as nice as the early footage would have had you believe, surprise, surprise, enemy animations are not great. They're bad. This isn't a critique only of the visual presentation of the game. The enemies look natural enough, it's a combat feel critique. And I know I'm not supposed to compare this game to Destiny, even though the game is clearly a purposeful competitor and its health is reliant on taking at least some of Destiny's player base away, but let me show a clip from Destiny here. See if you can notice a difference. See how the enemies respond to damage? That spectacularly good visual feedback is one of Destiny's greatest strengths, and the artistry of the animations go a long way to making the combat look and feel visceral and real, and they serve an important mechanical function by allowing players to control how much damage they take by staggering enemies strategically. Anthem's enemies do not seem to mind being shot. If you melee them, or if you do a shitload of damage, they will occasionally fall very awkwardly and woodenly to the ground, but for the most part, almost every enemy just stands there soaking up your bullets as if nothing is happening, and then they die. If you removed the health bars and numbers from Destiny's enemies, you would still get all of the visual feedback you need to know how you are doing. If you remove the numbers and health and shield bars from the enemies in Anthem, you would have no way of knowing if they were even taking damage at all. This combination of very poor AI and very weak animations makes the combat feel kinda hollow at times. It makes the encounters stale, and more importantly, it makes the fights feel like you're fighting target dummies who are holding guns. Little things like this are all over Anthem. The game's actual moment-to-moment combat is surprisingly unpolished and poorly balanced. Enemies and encounters are extremely spongy, and wave after wave after wave of enemies spawn until a little blip comes up to let you know it's time to fly for 30 seconds to the next arena. There are a lot of things to like about Anthem's combat, a lot, but it's not spectacular in any way. It's much closer to good than it is to great. I think one of the best ways to explain this is to say that the very best thing in the beta was when you were fighting spiders and the spider boss. Because they aren't hitting you with hit-scan weapons, you have total control over the fight. Dodging and flying suddenly becomes a dynamic way to actually control the pace of combat. Tactical decisions feel more important, and everything just flows better. And hitting spiders with combos and watching them blow up is super fun. But whenever you're fighting the humanoid enemies, the game just slaps you in the face every time you try to actually use the game's commendable mobility systems. Playing on normal or above requires you to be far too careful to really dive into those systems that make traversal and combat feel at its best. And that's a shame, really. It's something that could be fixed with better enemy animations that's made them stagger every so often, or at the very least by toning down health quite a bit. As for the other aspects of the game, while there wasn't much actual story on offer here, what was there made clear that this game has little to nothing to offer people who are fans of Bioware games. Facial animations aren't disastrously, nightmarishly meme-worthy, but they aren't all that good actually. Voice acting is okay in places and tiresome in most others. The conversations you have range from boring to annoying. The dialogue options seem completely meaningless, like choosing between, yes, I'd like a sandwich, and actually, I already ate this morning. The story of the game might very well be okay, although I'm getting a bad feeling about it, but it's pretty obvious that BioWare has gone from deep, branching RPG dialogue to a dialogue wheel, to a simplified dialogue wheel, to a meaningless dialogue choice. They've confirmed there will be no branching paths of any kind, so this system exists only to insulate them from criticism and maybe trick some fans into believing that this game might kind of resemble their previous games. It doesn't. This game is almost entirely centered around improving Mass Effect Andromeda's combat system. That's obviously been the central focus. And again, I actually really loved the combat in Mass Effect Andromeda, but I just don't think there's anything here for fans of their previous games. And the combat and moment-to-moment gameplay, while quite good and fun, simply is not on the same level of quality as Destiny, or perhaps even Warframe, which means this game is in a strange in-between state. It's a more casual and simplified version of Warframe or Destiny with the potential to have a decent story. But it has nothing to offer fans of BioWare's older games, and it doesn't offer combat good enough to poach very many players of Warframe or Destiny. Which brings me to the very concept of this past weekend's quote-unquote demo. BioWare got a bunch of goodwill and attaboys from people, myself included, for admitting that early access only a couple of weeks from release isn't actually a beta. But when a customer hears that something is a try before you buy demo, they have a reasonable expectation that what they are trying is the finished product. Instead, BioWare announced, only after the first demo was a total catastrophe, that this was a weeks-old build with, quote, significant differences in balance, economy, and bug fixes, unquote. I'm confused as to why you would release something that you are calling a demo and not put out a more current build. Or if they knew that they were putting out something that had significant issues, why wouldn't they call it a beta or stress test? What possible reasons could there be for that? At best, this was a very bad business and marketing decision from a developer and a publisher whose most recent releases have been varying shades of disastrous. And considering how shockingly bad the performance was, it seems that this game is not ready for release at all. If the game was going to be a weeks-old build, with significant bugs and totally different balance, why would you tell everyone this was a demo of the finished game that was meant to convince you to buy it? It's a troubling gaffe and is a bad sign about how things are going with the final release. Very, very close. Less than 2 weeks close. I'm going to buy and play the game. I liked the combat enough to give it a try, and I still hope the story is at least engaging. But I just do not think this is going to end up being a great game now. I think it's far more likely this ends up being a pretty good game. From what I've experienced between the alpha and demos, it's feeling kind of like Mass Effect Andromeda with slightly better combat, competent facial animations, and somehow an even worse dialogue system. A good, but not great game. A game that falls in between and doesn't offer enough of anything to find a huge audience. It confuses me that BioWare, who became a titan of gaming for complex RPGs, and then for deep, branching, mature stories, would think they need to tone down everything that made them successful to be more successful. It never fails to amaze me when companies fail to understand what it was about their games that players loved in the first place. It simply doesn't make sense to me. Bungie became an industry leader by making top-notch FPS combat, and then they went and made Destiny, which focuses almost completely on providing top-notch FPS combat. BioWare became an industry leader making mature, complex RPGs with engaging stories and important dialogue choices, and then began making less and less complex RPGs with less and less dialogue. Mass Effect Andromeda had the best combat BioWare had ever made by a mile, and the game was a flop. People just don't buy BioWare games for combat mechanics. If Mass Effect 2 had had the Mass Effect Andromeda combat, it might have been the best game ever. And obviously, the more fun the combat, the better, but it's not what made the studio successful. And Anthem's combat, while very good, isn't good enough to compete with studios who have spent their entire careers perfecting shooting combat. If EA and Bioware were hoping to sell 15 million units and have a huge hit, I think a big disappointment is coming. Anthem is looking like it'll be pretty good. If it works at launch, I can see myself playing it through the campaign and thinking it was worth my time, but I have a feeling pretty good isn't what they were hoping for. I am a bit less excited to play the game now than I was before I played the demos. And I've got a feeling the game isn't going to be much better than what I've already played. it'll just be more of it. Frankly, I hope I am proven wrong, because BioWare closing would be a terrible thing. But in all honesty, can anyone give me even one example of a game's beta that was significantly different than its release? Can we finally admit that these betas/demos are basically representative slices of exactly what you will get at launch? This might have been one of the very worst beta demos I have ever played performance-wise for a AAA game. BioWare should thank their lucky stars that Fallout 76 is still shitting the bed on a daily basis and is still fresh in everyone's mind. Because if Fallout 76 hadn't happened and redefined what a total mess a beta can be, this would be a much bigger and much worse story for BioWare than it is. Alright, see you in a few days. Thanks for coming. Bye.